Hello, everyone. This is Lupe Munoz.
And I'm Steve McKeon, and welcome to the Leadership Exchange.
Steve, today we're going to continue our discussion around high-performance work teams. We're going to talk a little bit about systems and how leaders can support it. We have a great guest today. This gentleman, someone that I have directly worked with. Mike Sweeney is an executive coach, a team development expert, a learning and development nerd, as he likes to call himself. He's an avid runner, father of 3 girls, and had a series of mini careers. He's kind of been all over the map like I have. Most recently, he's serving as a chief strategy officer for Rally Bright. It's a startup company where clients build inclusive, resilient, high-performance work teams at scale. He's had 7 years as an executive coach at Sabre Coaching. Currently, is got a really great project we're going to hopefully talk at the very end called Leadership Edge that he is launching. This guy's an ex-Army CAV officer. He's experienced running small wineries in the Napa Valley. And then if that wasn't enough, he's got several years in manufacturing. And something that's really dear to our hearts is Lean Six Sigma and also leading complex organizational change. Mike's education is in organizational psychology. He spent years studying and practicing the keys to great leadership. His diverse background helps him and will help us, I think, discover and optimize patterns of organizational behavior to help leaders and teams improve performance. Mike's got a master's. It's interesting. He's got a YouTube channel, and he does a talk that's called Put a Rubber Chicken in Your Toolkit. So he's going to have to really explain that later. But this guy's run 10,000 miles, so he's kind of a renaissance man or a jack of all trades. My pleasure to introduce Mike Sweeney to our program and have him kick us off with the story. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
No, thanks so much for having me. I think the only thing I can really say after the intro is, oh, shucks. And it only makes sense now, not while I was doing it. There were a lot of twists and turns. And the topic of high-performing leadership is kind of core to the work that I do. And I'm excited to be here on your podcast just because I know that you two are both very much students of leadership. I remember you asked me about kind of how I got into high-performing teams. And I can remember the moment. I was working at a winery. We were doing some line renovations. And I had a training team, and we had a recipe where we would teach people the new equipment, and then we would teach people conflict resolution and communication and shift handover, all sorts of things like that. And they would do little skits almost about what it was going to sound like when we were doing it the right way. And this, I'd say maybe long in the tooth, old school leader said, when it's time for my line to renovate, just do the skills training on the new equipment. I don't want any of that woo-woo shit. Excuse me. I didn't ask if I could curse on the podcast.
Sure, wow.
That's all right. That's all right. We're all adults.
I'll try to keep it clean. But that's literally what he said. And then I think there was a moment of challenge in that. And I said, what if I told you that the woo-woo stuff can get you performance? And he's like, well, then I'd do it. So I kind of went off and I found a forward-thinking team leader and a production engineer because my undergrad degree is in English. So like usually the math is being done by somebody else. And I said, hey, I've got this idea. I want to try to train these pieces. Grabbed a few other people and we did an assessment. We did some training on just the real skills or the soft skills of leadership and team development. And I remember not really knowing much about it. And I didn't have really any models to use. It was a bunch of Googling and reading leading high-performing work teams. And we measured over a period of 3 months. We kind of did a pre and then a post, and we saw that the efficiency or OEE of the line went up 5%. So I went back to that manager and I said, look, the woo-woo stuff can get you results. And I think it was since then that I kept wanting to study, what are the elements that create that 1 + 1 = 3,000 kind of experience? What are the things that you can do to create a high-performing team as defined by actual business metrics? So happy to be here. And that's really what got me into the topic.
That's a great opening story. Thanks for sharing that with us, Mike. And the diverse background that I think the three of us share, that's kind of our common experience as we all have gone in really different directions. But I think that underlying theme of an interest that we have in people development, right? And building and being part of great teams and been through each one of our opportunities in life. For a new leader out there, I guess what I'd like you to maybe kind of talk to us about is, what are those skills that team members need when we talk about high performance work teams, but also the leader, like what are those fundamental skills that they need to have to be successful in developing those teams?
Well, I think there's both skill sets and mindsets. For example, the mindset of a servant leader might be the inverted pyramid. We serve those who serve the customer. And so the way you're going to run a one-on-one, a skill might be how to run an effective one-on-one. It might be the team member's agenda. But you only get there if you have the mindset, right? Same thing with, one of the skills might be running an effective lessons learned or debrief. But the mindset is that failure is okay and that learning is important. So I think that there's probably a mix of skill sets and mindsets. When I do work with Rally Bright and we help build high performing teams at scale, we look at kind of 5 dimensions. One of them is connection. To what extent do these people have trust between each other? And there are some skill sets within that include having conversations, listening, giving feedback, etc. We look at attitude. Do they have a growth mindset, and are they geared toward maybe more optimism? Then we look at some of the more skills that are related to impact. Are they adaptable? So can they learn fast? Can they deal with failure? Can they iterate? Do they have a sense of direction? Do they know where they're going? Do they know what the shared output is supposed to be? And then do they have, I'd say, behaviors that and skills that relate to performance? Like, can they hold each other accountable? Can they make sure that they're delivering things on time? So I think there's a whole host of skill sets, but there's also that mindset. So like if you believe that it's important to grow in the area of your strength, you're going to approach certain skills like how you give feedback, what you pay attention to, et cetera, differently. So I think there's a huge number of individual skills and then also individual mindsets that make up building high performing teams.
Thanks, Mike. That's a excellent perspective on high performance work teams. It's great to hear a lot of the things that we've talked in the past are some of the things that you're also touching on in your response. In your experience, Mike, what do you see as the most common mistake that leaders and organizations make regarding high performance work teams and leading them?
I'm going to use this based on what my observations are, but also what our data tells us across 500 plus teams. The first thing is I think there's usually confusion between what a group is and what a team is. So you have a collection of people. With a team, it's usually shared output and a level of interdependence. Like if you think from a metaphor, a basketball team is highly interdependent. They're passing, offense, defense, they're all working together in flow. Then you might have like a relay team where they're handing off at certain times, where that's like an executive team where certain moments are really important. And then you might have a wrestling team or something that is more individual, and you don't really look at the collective output until you add up the score at the end. So I think making sure that when we're talking about teams, we're talking about interdependent set of people with common output. A lot of times what I see people trying to do is build high performing teams based on their direct reports. And it's like, well, are they all involved in that shared output is kind of the first thing. The second is I often see teams that are too large. Trying to make a decision with 14 people in the room, like just doesn't often work all that well. It gets more complex. There's a number of relationships, 2-on-1, 1-on-1, et cetera. And so, once you're over 12, it's a little harder. I think kind of 5 to 8 is the sweet spot for a really high performing team where everyone's contributing. It's context dependent, but if you think of like an orchestra, I'd say that's a high performing team and it's pretty darn big. So depending on the context, it can change. Often there's a lack of clarity to purpose. One of the things that we do at Rally Bright is we'll ask people, to what level do you feel comfortable with your team's purpose? And they rate it on a Likert scale. And then we also ask them, how would you summarize that? And it's funny, sometimes they rate it high, but everybody defines it differently. And so making sure that people are really clear, like what's the island that they're sailing to and what matters. Lack of KPIs is another one. Definitely lack of accountability, especially at the behavioral level. So if you think in a room, let's say you have a set of team norms and one of them is we're going to share a voice and one person's dominating, what do they do? So if one person's dominating, does anybody raise their hand? Does anybody say like, hey, I want to circle back? And I think oftentimes meetings can be ineffective because we're not holding each other accountable, not only behaviorally, but also to deliverables. Like, I know when Lupe didn't get something done. Lupe knows when I didn't get something done, but are we talking about that? And I might add the last one is just really spending some time making sure there's trust in place. We spend a lot of time talking to teams about the trust equation, and I'm blatantly stealing this. And I can't remember where from, but I remember reading it once where it was your trustworthiness as an individual is reliability plus credibility plus intimacy over self-interest. So to what extent can I be counted on? To what extent do I have a subject matter expertise? Am I willing to be vulnerable and share and let people into what's going on in my world? And do I care only about me and my group, or do I care about the collective? That's just the broad brushstroke. I might just throw one more on the fire, that a lack of adaptability is the number one dimension we see teams struggling with. They're just not learning fast enough in today's climate. And I don't want to paint a picture that there's all these teams out there that are struggling. There are certainly areas where people are much stronger, especially post-COVID with remote teams. But, to answer the question, those are the kind of top areas that jump out, the blinking red ones.
Yeah, Mike, that's, those are really key attributes. And, the other thing that I think is related to this conversation, and is something that Lupe and I talk a lot about, because I think we both learned it a little bit later in our careers, and how valuable it would have been to really kind of learn early on that as a leader, you don't have to know how to do all this stuff, but what you have to do is you have to create the environment for it to occur. And so the sooner you can learn to do that as a leader, and I'm going to ask you just to describe maybe what that perfect environment is for, this developing high performance work teams in a minute. But I think for a lot of leaders, that's one of the aha moments that we all go through, is like, okay, it's not tactics always, it's mindset, and it's creating that safe space, right, for people to grow, make mistakes, and as a team be able to learn from those and move on. And so describe that a little bit in terms of, the work you've done to help leaders learn how to create that environment.
Sure. The first thing I might say is I was listening to a podcast. It's called the Learning and Performance Podcast, and Amy Edmondson was on it. She's done a lot of research on psychological safety, and I just heard this yesterday. She had a reframe on the term safe space. She feels like that's getting a bad rap. So she has brave spaces is what she looks for. Areas where people are willing to take the step across the line and say the courageous thing. But just sometimes that safety word has a bad rap. An environment where there's an opportunity for bravery to show up. Interesting that you asked about kind of what's the environment. I do think it's a leader's role to set the conditions. I also agree with you that you don't have to know everything. I think one of the best things that happened in my career is having a couple mishires that I was hiring in my own image. And I was like, oh, I already have that opinion. And then I started hiring with a more diverse point of view, looking for a diversity of thought and realizing, find people who have different skills, find people that do things wildly different than you. And that conversation is going to be really powerful. And I think it was through some mistakes that I really came to that. I wrote a LinkedIn post recently called Leaders Set the Conditions. And the things that I've found leaders doing when they're setting the conditions for build teams, for high performing teams, is they're clear on what success looks like. I find this even at the one-on-one level with delegation. A lot of times you say like, hey, can you create me this one pager? And you have in your mind a definition of what good looks like, and the individual has a different definition. And then they bring it to you and you're like, well, that's not what I meant. And they're like, but that's what I thought you meant. So kind of defining what a good job looks like and determining what enough is important for the team, and having that shared view of what does winning really mean to us and what are the KPIs that we're going to use to determine that. I think there's an element of setting conditions for safety. There's one post I used to do all the time with a team. I'd do a Teams post. Anytime someone started to talk about blame, I'd quote Deming and just say, look, originally 85% of the problem is due to the system, not the people. He revised it to 95%. I see opportunities for improvement. I don't really think about fear and blame. Let's talk about it and move on. And I'd always sign it, love Mike. And just to try to make it so like, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to make a mistake. We don't have to worry about who's to blame. Let's just all kind of work on it together and lean on each other. I'd say it's important to make growth a fundamental part of the work that the team is doing. So they should be seeking feedback. They should be learning new skills and behaviors. They should be practicing with AI and bringing it back to each other, consistently building capabilities. Maybe another condition would be confidence, trying to catch people doing things right, encouraging them. You know what? That one pager, we talked about it. We defined the good job. That was spot on. And here's the impact that that has on me, on the team, on the customer, et cetera. Having a level of engagement, making sure that there's positive relationships, making sure that we're connecting the work to something meaningful, and then keeping all the boats headed in the same direction when the wind starts blowing. Those are the ones that are top of mind. I'm sure there are many, many more, but those are all things that leaders have to learn how to do and have to approach with specific mindset. Like if you're focused on catching people doing things wrong, you're going to find it. If you're focused on catching people doing things right, you're probably going to find some of those too. And it's a matter of kind of, I remember what was that book, Learning to See, that we read years ago, where it was almost like you're learning to see organizational waste. Once you learn that, you can't unlearn that. And it's the same thing with thinking about how we approach behavior change and feedback. If we're trained to realize that negative to positive feedback has to have a certain ratio, we'll start looking for more data points that are balanced. So probably a long answer to a short question, Steve.
No, I loved it, Mike. And you touched on a lot of things, and I was reflecting on some of the comments that you just made. And one of the things that kept popping up in the back of my mind is that balance, right? So that balance as a leader you have to have on driving forward, moving the team forward, but then the patience of letting them learn, letting them trial, letting them make mistakes, recover. And so I love the description. I think you provided some really good insights to our listeners on just that environment that is out there.
I agree 100%. Mike, if you could go back in time to yourself as a young leader, sort of up and coming leader. They're not all young leaders. There's some people, mid life decide that they're going to or find themselves in a leadership role for a first time. What are the things you would advise yourself, the first leader, Mike Sweeney, and all the new leaders out there? What advice would you give to those people?
Like the advice to myself and the advice to everybody else might be a little different, but I'll start with the toughest stuff. I think I would have told myself that achievement matters, but it's not everything. I remember running into a positive psychology framework once called PERMA, which was positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. And I think I was very, very heavy on the A. And I think the fuel for that in some ways was toxic. It came from a less than place. Like, I don't feel like I'm a great leader because I've gotten this feedback. I'm going to be voracious about learning that skill. It served me well, but I think if I maybe had a point of view that was more balanced, that like, it feels good to feel good sometimes, like it feels good to celebrate. And I often find this when I'm coaching executive male leaders, and I'll say in my intro session, I'll say, what does it sound like when you celebrate? And like, what do you mean celebrate? Like, that's the consistent response I get. That sounds soft. And eventually by the end, hopefully we're hearing a few woohoos and doing some high fives. So I think like maybe tempering the achievement energy and use a more sustainable fuel. Like, we can feel great today and feel like enough and yet still have the desire to grow. And I think that fuel burned pretty hot. So when I didn't get my way or I ran into barriers, it was very clear. And I think that has changed quite a bit over time. And, having those 3 teenage daughters, I can remember one time I was really frustrated with something my middle daughter was doing. And I was like yelling at her. And she looked at me and she said, "Daddy, I'm highing. Like, can't you see that I'm crying? How can you have, like, what's going on?" And I think it was a lot of moments like that. I used to have my girls do report cards and they got to pick the subjects, like, plays with us, yelling, takes us to ice cream. And I got a couple C's in a few areas. And I think that balancing the achievement energy with some other things probably would be the advice that I'd give myself. And then I'd layer on a sprinkle of self-compassion. Like, you're okay. Like you're going to figure it out. Some of these things are hard. So I'd say for leaders, maybe the advice is explore the who you are side of leadership as much as what you do, because you're going to have certain responses. We in this training program I went to, we kind of talked about it as this be side and this do side. Leadership is who you are. Leadership is what you do. And so some of the things of like, well, why did that trigger me? Why in that meeting was I pushing harder? Why does that particular boss irk me? What does it mean to be easy to work with? I think those are the things that what are my values? What do I care about? What's my reason for being? Why do I want to lead people? I think that's often we're really hyper focused on leadership development, but it's like a skill game. Even in our conversation is a bit skill, but sometimes it's that mindset, getting yourself right, giving yourself the time to explore. And I'd say for everybody, like, figure out why you want to lead and what it means to you, and figure out who you are and kind of what's your operating system and why you are the way you are. I guess that would be my advice.
One of the things that really stuck out for me is the be. You have to be a leader, and that to me invokes a very deep passion, a very deep sense of wanting to serve others. Believe it or not, I actually had one person in an interviewing for a leader role within the organization I was part of. I asked, "Hey, why do you want to be a supervisor?" I think it was a supervisor role. Why do you want to be a supervisor? And he actually said, "Because I really want to be able to tell people what to do." Which blew my mind, right? So I totally appreciate what you're talking about there.
Yeah, we talked about this last time, Lupe and Mike, that we had a chance to speak. And that's, we've seen those opportunities where a person that's very technically qualified in a role gets promoted into leadership, and they continue to evolve, and they may become a great leader, or they may become extremely miserable and not be a great leader. And I think, one of the things as we're developing teams and we're looking at the different people in an organization, it's important to let the whole group know that promotional opportunities aren't just to become that leader. To Lupe's point, the person that he had interviewed that want to be able to boss people around, that's not being the leader, right? And so, I think those are moments as well, as to understand that, just the ability of someone to continue to mature as a senior technical person in an organization and deliver extreme value has as much importance to the organization as someone that's tracked into leader and has that kind of, and it may not even be natural, but the ability to learn what, the things that we've had a chance to learn over time and practice. And I can tell you, for one, it's been a learning opportunity, because I was not, and I'm still not there. I look at the things that I would like to continue to do better. And, I can reflect back to that 20-year-old person that got their first opportunity to lead teams. And there's room to grow and continue to grow. And there's lanes for people to grow in, whether it's leadership or just being that team key contributor. What's your experience been there, Mike? Because I know, the background you have with your master's program, looking at people, behaviors, and the work environment probably lends itself to, how you might coach a leader into looking at his team.
There's a lot in that, right? So figuring out why people want to lead and not being, hey, just bossing people around, or I want more money, I want title, kind of figuring out what they want. I always wanted to write a one-page leadership manual that has one page on it. It just says, it's not about you. And then you hand it out to all the new leaders, like, this is your instruction manual. As far as the coaching the team, I think about culture, and I'm probably quoting from a couple of people here, but like as the output of leadership behaviors demonstrated and tolerated over time. So like thinking about what the behaviors are, how do you want to start your meetings? What do you want the team norms to be? And figuring out with a team, it's usually not just the leader's voice. It's like, how do you want to be collaborative in setting up the norms or how this team operates? And when do you want input and when do you not want input? When are you going to make decisions on your own? When are you going to ask for input? And then when are you going to make it a full consensus decision? And just being purposeful about that And I think a lot has to do with the context. But when I'm coaching leaders, usually at least in a team context, the first thing I like to do is, where are we? So we'll run an assessment to figure out on those dimensions I talked about earlier, what do they think and what does the team think? And then sit down with that leader and say, like, okay, here's where you are in connection. You think this, the team thinks this. Here's the verbatim comments. What are we making that mean? What does that bring up to you? And kind of walk through that data to get a baseline, and then sit down with the team and run a workshop and kind of make meaning together. And then they have a couple commitments of, these are the couple things that we want to work on. And there's usually something for the team to work on, but then there's probably some things for the leader to work on because they're having an outsized impact. Like if the leader's the first one to talk all the time, that's going to have an impact on share of voice. So sometimes just gathering a little bit of incoming data, like there's a lot of tools out there. Record a meeting and look at talk time. Just get curious. I remember I had a team at one point where I noticed that I was responding to the male colleagues faster than the female colleagues. I was using Microsoft Analytics to look at that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's something I need to adjust. So maybe pulling in some team data, running an assessment, having a conversation to figure out, where are we right now? And then making a plan to improve from there, debriefing after big events. And I think the if a person really wants to improve their team and improve themselves as a leader, you kind of have to take stock and take an inventory first.
Great point, Mike. And I think we've all had those experiences of just that self-reflection, as we've moved into, the different roles and each steps. And the thing that I can say is that every team that I've had the opportunity to lead have been very different, although technical backgrounds somewhat similar, but, just very different, because at the end of the day, people are different, right? And so leveraging those strengths. And, I like what you said early on about not trying to hire someone that's identical to you, so that you have that diversity in thought, in an organizational team that makes such a great opportunity. One other thing that you had mentioned previously when we talked is just the self-growth, right, as a leader. And you shared a story with us about, how you learned to develop the ability to get in front of people and speak to them. And I think right now you're such an articulate speaker. You've got, you got this big career now out in front of audiences. And I think it'd be good for listeners, that we target, which are kind of new leaders, to kind of learn how to gauge, how you can get over maybe that fear of the public speaking or, standing in front of large groups, that kind of stuff.
So Lupe was there, so he can attest to this. I remember I was an extremely nervous public speaker, stomach troubles night before I couldn't sleep. And I had one moment where I was delivering a company update or a unit update, and I was on a riser, and I fell off it. And I didn't fall on the ground, but I kind of hopped down 2.5 feet or so. And then I hopped right back up and kept going with my prepared remarks and didn't even mention it. And the whole audience is like, what is going on? I was so not present. I was just formulaic, but I wanted to be a good speaker. And I dreaded it. I would prep like crazy. I would overthink it. There was one day where I think it was Lupe's boss at the time. He said, you're always talking about leadership and you're reading all these books and, you have a point of view. Do you want to come down to my big offsite and speak? We're going to do it in Monterey. It's going to be this nice hotel. You're going to have, fish swimming around. And I just said yes, because I had this dream of I want to be a good public speaker. And as soon as I said yes and I accepted, I freaked out. And so I was trying to figure out, how do I learn this stuff? So I did some training. I remember going to a Dale Carnegie training, and they talked about congruence, where it's your body position and your slides and where you're standing in the room. It was really good. And then I ran into, I had a workshop at this conference run by the Second City, which is the Second City is usually a feeder for Saturday Night Live. And they had a Second City session, and it was based on humor at work. And I was like, oh my God, I love comedians. This is so fun. And so I then signed up at the proud graduate of San Francisco Comedy College Level 1. Signed up for improv, went through that, and I realized that a lot of my nerves were I was putting pressure on myself, and I had to kind of de-stress and really focus on what the other people were saying, what's the energy in the room, and it taught me a level of presence. And so I did that for, 8 weeks or so, ended up, if you can get on stage and have to be funny, but have nothing funny written down, it's way easier to deliver prepared remarks. So I did that whole thing, and then I got hurt right before it. So instead of pacing and walking, I had to be in this chair. It was like this big, tall bar stool chair. And it almost became like a contemplative, like, here's what I've learned. And I got really good response from it. And I think it was in that moment where I really wanted something, but I was super scared of it. And I just found a few creative ways. Of course, I prepped, but there was something that I wanted to do it so much. And it meant so much to me that the nerves kind of floated away. But it was through some uncommon approaches to learning. I'm not a really good classroom learner. Like, I have to be engaged. I have to do kind of different things. And I have to get to practical application as soon as I can, or I just get bored. So finding uncommon ways to learn a particular skill like public speaking, and that actually got me down the humor track. I studied humor as a response to stress in organizations. That's where that rubber chicken, just to kind of call it back to the intro. But I always wanted to be an author, and I wanted to be a public speaker. And I think it was just finding a way to step across the threshold and do it anyway.
That's great, Mike. And I mean, it goes back to what you said a little bit ago, the finding not just a safe space, but you have to be brave, right, as well. You have to make that step across and into an area. And I think, a lot of times leaders are looking for organizations to develop them. And I think as a young leader, you've also really got to think about, how you develop yourself. And there's a lot of great podcasts out there, this being one of them that we really like to promote. But Mike, you've probably got some examples of other leadership opportunities. And I think, one of the things Lupe and I are really excited about is to hear a little bit more about Leadership Edge and to really understand, what it is that you're presenting and, the group you're targeting with that training opportunity.
Oh, thank you for that opportunity to do that. I do think that leadership development, I think leadership is a craft that can be mastered over time, right? It starts with like, can you set a goal for yourself? Can you make it smart? Can you make it smart for other people? Can you make it for a team? Can you do it for an organization? Can you do it for a global organization? So I think it's a constantly growing tool set, but it's not an organization's job to develop you. It's your job to develop yourself. I think organizations can support, but they're not the one, they don't own it. You own it. I read a study recently, or it wasn't a study, it was some data on layoffs. 31% of the last round of tech layoffs were manager level. So if we're not raising our game, and if we're not finding ways to be more effective and get more done with less and bring more of the best out of people, there's really some risk. And I don't want to make it like a fear-based story. Plants grow in the direction of sunlight. So I want it to be, if people are interested in growing, I think the old ways of, you read the book or you go to a training session and it's like a half-day session. I just don't think those are that effective. And part of me, when I started working in HR, is I was well-versed in waste. And I just found that there's a lot of waste involved in traditional leadership development programs. I found with a lot of my coaching, especially when it's leaders in the 2 to 5 year range, or maybe leaders in the 6 to 10 year range who have plateaued, right? Because they're kind of similar. Like they both need to rapidly develop skills, but they're not newbies. That's kind of the sweet spot. I coach a lot of them. And 9 times out of 10, we run into a situation where they say, well, how do I do that feedback? And I'm like, well, do you know this model, that model, that model? I'm like, oh, okay. My job as a coach is to kind of reach inside and bring out your best, but like you are missing a skill here. So what I will do is I'll kind of put a pin in that. And then after the coaching session, I'll just record like a 6-10 minute overview of like, okay, here are the perspectives on feedback. Here's how you do it. Here's a point of view on situational leadership. Here's a point of view on the radical candor 2x2. Here's a point of view on Eisenhower's 2x2, importance and urgency. And I'll just send it to them. And I started collecting a lot of those. And I realized that there are a lot of leaders with a lot of how questions. And the thing is, it's not a content problem. Like they can Google it, they can find the same stuff, but it's like, it's a matching. It's like, I have this situation, I'm in this context, like what's possible? And it's almost like it comes up in the coaching conversation. So what I'm observing from leaders are, everybody seems to be overwhelmed. There's too much to do and I'm not getting time. Many people are distracted. Like they're looking at their phone, they're doing something else. They're not sitting down and focusing for 8 hours in a training session. They're not reading the books. Their companies are not investing. And even if they're investing, best case scenario, they're getting like 2 to 3% because the economy is tricky. And what people don't realize is that like compensation works on an S curve. You go up like this, slightly, then you make a big jump when you increase your level. That's that 10%, 20%, whatever it is. And then it steadies for a while. So when you can have a greater impact on more people, you tend to make more money. So I think a lot of people are kind of stalled in that middle. And then I also find, especially for the male leaders, they're not really accessing a peer group. Like in our conversation, we're all learning from each other. We have the opportunity over time when we work together to learn each other's point of view. So I'm just seeing a lot of that. So I said, well, okay, if I could go back and look at all the leadership development programs that I ever went to and find the commonalities, if I could think about all the books I've read in the last 20 years, and I've read about 2 to 3 a month, often they're about leadership development. If I can pull in my org psych work, if I can pull in the work from coaching, if I can pull in some real world practical experience from my Armored Cavalry days all the way through VP at Bain & Company, toss in a little lean and Six Sigma, and then realize that the game is to help people perform and build the skill and not to sit there and pontificate. That's what I tried to put together. So it's an 8-week cohort-based program. So I'm looking to get 8 people in it. It's the pilot time I'm going to run it. First 4 weeks are going to be who you are. Next 4 weeks are going to be what you do. So we'll get into values. We'll get into your strengths. We'll get into some of your saboteurs and the shadow. If you know anything about Carl Jung, we all have that shadow. We'll get into relationships and growth edges. And then when we get to the what you do, I'm actually splitting it 2 ways. There'll be 4 core topics, and then there'll be kind of an optional self-study that the individuals will end up doing a teach back on. So time management is one of them, time and meeting management, flexibility and coaching. We've got some situational leadership in there, accountability, delegation, and feedback, and then support networks and making sure that you have like a personal board of directors. And then the parts that they're going to do self-study on is going to be dependent on what they specifically need. And I'm going to do some laser coaching with them one-on-one so they can learn that skill. And then everyone in the cohort's going to learn that skill. And ideally, the dream for me is that we keep doing this. And then we have a whole host of people who are focused on mastering their craft. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. I'm kind of deep in development of it right now. And I want to run the pilot program at a reasonable rate and get some really good leaders in it and have them help me tweak it.
Sounds like a great opportunity. I love hearing how you're describing that, Mike. And I do agree that a lot of times it's kind of like the analogy I like to use is learning baseball, right? It's one thing to understand in a classroom how the game is played.
Yeah.
There's a diamond, you hit the ball, but it's not till you actually play the game physically that you really understand the nuances of baseball and how something that sounds easy is actually a little harder to do. If you looked at me when I was going through my childhood playing baseball, you would see a great example of where it's a lot harder to execute some simple things in baseball.
I love that. I'd say that this is probably like learning the body mechanics, going to the batting cages, scrimmaging, and doing fungo situations with your coach, right? Like, all right, 2 down, this is the situation. So I want to make it practical. There'll be weekly 90-minute sessions, but I remember reading this book called The Inner Game of Tennis years ago. And one of the main principles in that book was, as coaches and leaders, we decrease the amount of instruction and increase the student's ability to notice and self-correct. So some of this will be opportunities for them to kind of watch their own videos. They'll get peer-to-peer feedback. They'll get feedback from me. But the key is that they need to know what tool to pull out at the right time. They need to know the body position and how to use it. And when they get that fat pitch over the sweet spot, they need to know how to swing for the fences. And that's what I'm hoping to create. I have some big dreams on what it's going to look like when 100, 200 people are through it. But for now, I want to just pour as much of what I've learned into a distilled program that gives them an opportunity to level up quickly with as little waste as possible.
Yeah, it sounds like an amazing opportunity, Mike. And, I applaud you for kind of how you've pulled all that together, and really excited to see and hopefully get you back on to let us know, how it's going once you have the launch underway.
It's like it's a bit like a mad scientist. Like I got sticky notes all over the place. I've got books open. And I think I'm trying to give myself the permission to run a pilot. right? Like, I think this resonates. I think the message is going to make sense. And I think if I get a good group who, I'm making the rate significantly reduced, then I have right inside, I'm going to run it in teams. And I have this whole place that's just like, this is the feedback on module 1, feedback on module 2, so they can keep contributing. And I was telling a friend of mine when I was going through it with him, I said, look, I want to make sure this is successful. So you're probably going to get a lot more of my time and a lot more iteration. So if the session didn't work, we're going to kind of redo. And I'm excited for the opportunity to not have to make it perfect the first time. So I'm looking for 8. I think 1 down. Hopefully I just launched it, the webpage this week. So 7 left. And I'd love to run another one in Q4, depending on the holidays, but I want to start with just doing a really good one now.
We'll put a link to that website for you in our notes for the episode, Mike, to make sure our listeners, if they're interested, can find it.
I think I was motivated when I ran into you in California. When you said, oh, that sounds interesting, it kind of motivated me to keep going. And it's a little scary sometimes when I put in my newsletter, I said, I'm going to launch this late May, early June. And then a couple of people mentioned it. And then I'm like, oh, I actually have to put a date and put together a page and put together pricing and then organize the content. The best part for me is I've either facilitated or participated in all of the different exercises I'm going to do. It's a matter of kind of putting the structure together and sewing the red threads, but the functional content I already know and I've already facilitated or experienced. So that actually makes it a little easier. It's scary to do that stuff sometimes. Scary to be brave.
Yeah, Mike, and I just, again, when you first gave us the heads up about it, there's not a window of opportunity for the group that you're wanting to target to go through that leadership. A lot of leadership training is really pretty basic information, or it's executive level, right? And executive level typically get what you're going to be providing, I think, to those new leaders in organizations or those that are, been leading for a little bit and have plateaued out. And so it could be a real game changer for people. I'm excited to see the feedback you get. I know Lupe and I both got a couple folks in mind that we'll probably talk to this week about, their interest maybe in being one of the 8. But keep us posted. Really interested, and encourage all listeners to check out the link to the Leadership Edge site that Lupe has put in the notes.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, so we're about to wrap up, and I just do want to make one note. That moment that you said, hey, Lupe was there and saw this, kind of like that moment that you feel was one of those moments where you started to realize that you wanted to do this for a living. For me, I noticed that too. That was, to me, a moment where I looked at you and I said, wow, this guy could do this for a living if he ever decided to do it. And it was amazing to me to see you, follow that dream, follow that passion into what you're doing now. And so I give you a lot of kudos for being able to be there to observe you at that moment was pretty amazing for me.
That it thrills me to hear that. And one of the things I talk a lot about is I use the concept of the edge a lot. We all have those edge moments when we walk up to the cliff, when we look around and we see something in the distance that we want. Sometimes we decide to take the leap and sometimes we kind of back off the cliff. I feel like life is a collection of those edge moments. And sometimes when we feel a pull in a certain direction, we know what's right, but we still don't move in that direction. Part of my work is trying to encourage people to be willing to cross the threshold. It might work, it might not work. Even this last career change, my only criteria for success was one way or the other, make it memorable. either a big flame or a big success. And
nice.
I think sometimes it can be really scary. But yeah, I remember you speaking on that day too. That was a really wonderful experience. And you had that strong leader that was a pleasure to be around.
Mike, I agree with Steve that I'm really hoping that you'll be able to come and join us again in the future, especially being able to share what's going on with the new project. It sounds like an exciting opportunity, and definitely I see the bravery in you to make it happen. We appreciate your time with us and with our listeners, but for now we'll call it a wrap. This is Lupe Munoz.
And I'm Steve McKeon, and thank you for listening to the Leadership Exchange.
Have a great day.